Well, welcome to the Kickstarter. And for this talk, we're going to be focusing on interviewing. And we're going to be talking about how to do a better job of interviewing and how this can help you with not only getting a job, but getting the job that you want and helping to even craft that job to make it better for you. My name is Frank Lexa, and I have the privilege of being the Chief Medical Officer of the RLI. And it's in that context today that I'm going to be talking to you as part of the overall Kickstarter program on how to really take your professional career to the next level. In my current position, I'm a neuroradiologist at the University of Pittsburgh. As you'll hear later in the talk, I spent almost 20 years working with the Wharton School, and I'm going to be sharing with you some of the secrets that they tell their students with how to interview successfully. So with that, welcome, and we're going to go ahead and get started. And our goals for this session are to understand the impact that good interview skills and habits can have on your career. And again, it's on your whole career. It's not just about getting a job, but the same skills you bring into a good interview session are going to be useful for you in understanding a job and doing a better job of communicating and working with your coworkers and helping you with your professional advancement. We'll talk to you about how to prepare for an interview. Sometimes people will tell you just go into an interview and be yourself. That's not bad advice, but there's a lot more to it. And we're going to be talking about how you prepare for an interview and the homework that's involved. I'm going to make sure that we cover basic ways that interviews can go bad. And this is sort of on the realm of how not to screw up. I spend a lot of time talking to people who hire radiologists. A lot of my peers have that as part of their job description. It has been part of my own job description. And I'll just tell you ways that people have failed to get a job because of something that went wrong with the interview. I'm going to talk to you about core things that you can do to improve your chances of getting the position you want. And then we'll cover a few advanced topics that can help to ensure your career success, things that probably aren't covered when you talk with your program director, when you talk with one of your mentors about how to interview, just some things that come up in advanced interviewing. Now, one of the first questions that many people have, and it's a fair question, is do interviews matter? Should we be doing them at all? Should we just accept people based on their scores on a standardized test or on their GPA? And this is a fascinating topic. It's been around for a long time. When I was a medical student, I was on an interviewing team to help people who were from far away from where I was going to medical school interview without having to pay to come out. And when you went on these traveling with the teams, one of the things that came up a lot was, do interviews actually make things worse when it comes to issues of diversity? In other words, we'll be better off if we hired people blind, so to speak. And this came up a couple of years ago in an NPR program that I heard on the radio. I found the original source, which is here. I know it looks like these people are in a North Korean prison camp, but believe it or not, they're actually interviewing for one of the biggest companies on the planet, one of the top tech companies in the world. And they're using, again, they have blindfolds on. In some of these, they use a voice changer so that literally you can't get any other cues about race, ethnicity, education, accent, national origin. And it kind of raises the question of, is this really interviewing when you do that? But certainly it's more like having a text conversation. And whether or not, we should just give up. And the answer is probably no. We probably should be doing interviews, but we do have to start with the understanding that everyone has prejudices, everybody has unconscious bias, and we have to accept that. We have to learn to work with that. We have to learn to be better than that. But giving up on interviews probably isn't the right answer for reasons that I'll share as we go through. And why do interviews matter? Well, one is that most people look alike. I bet if I were to meet all of you who are in this program, if we were to meet in the real world and you were to show me your CVs, I bet you would look a lot alike on paper. I bet you're all smart. I bet you all get good grades. I bet you all work hard. I bet you all haven't had behavioral problems, very few felonies in the room, so to speak. You look alike. Your residency and fellowship program directors tell us that you're all great, but that's not very helpful when we can only hire one of you. So that doesn't often provide a great deal of clarity. Sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're not. It's also not just about your grades anymore. I'm sure your mom is thrilled that you were #1 in your organic chemistry class, but as you move through life, that becomes less and less important to everyone else. And you know, in the end, it's not just about a US News and World Report ranking of programs and then some kind of magical ranking of residents, and then the best ones get the best jobs at the best places. We know that those kinds of ranking systems are flawed. And in the end, it's about compatibility. It's about, do you fit in the job? It's not just about going to the place that's perceived to be the best. Is it a good fit for you personally? And this is one of the major reasons why people fail in jobs, why they don't do well. So take this very seriously. In one of the business domains that I worked in, which was strategic consulting, we called this the compatibility test or the airplane test. And it meant, could you sit next to somebody on a plane flight from Philadelphia to San Francisco for 5 or 6 hours, depending on which way you're flying? And would you be able to get along with each other? And would you be compatible with each other? Now, we know that in radiology, we sometimes spend 10, 12, 14 hours on call, at least on Saturdays and Sundays, sometimes in neuro, sitting next to someone or being in the same room with someone, and getting along with other people really matters. And so it is more complicated than just simple numerical metrics. Now, what should happen if an interview works? Because I would start by saying that many interviews that you have probably already had in your life and that you might have going forward aren't very good, and they probably don't succeed in adding much information to what's already in your CV and your letters, but it should. And if it doesn't, then you're probably wasting your time and the interviewer's time, or more likely they're not very good at interviewing you, so they're the ones who are wasting the time. And we'll talk about how to make that work better for you. But it should be more than just what's already on the paper. My personal habit is that I read all the paper first so that I don't ask you in our 30 minutes together stupid questions that I could have answered myself if I had just bothered to read your CV, but that's my style. It gives you an opportunity to talk about yourself. You should be setting your agenda. I'm sure there are things that you think are important that might not come across well from the paper that you've submitted. And it's also your chance to make your own points. If there's something in particular that's a strength or that someone might perceive as a weakness and you want to explain why it's not a weakness, this is your chance. Also, more importantly, it's your chance to collect information. There probably isn't enough information on the web or from your friends to really make an informed decision about making, a big decision. This could be a 30 or 35-year-long job. Make sure you get the information you need and make a list. So you know that by the end of the interview, during that period where they say, do you have any questions for us, that you make sure you get your questions answered and you come out with enough information to make that tough decision. Now, I used to have a list of 10 mistakes, but just before COVID, we were in a hot job market for radiologists. And it got to the point where there was another mistake that people were making. And it's confusing interviewing and negotiating. People were feeling very strong then when they went in for interviews. They knew they were going to get a lot of job offers, and they would sometimes not even get the job. And they would already start negotiating for call or for salary or for this or for that. That's the wrong way to do it. First, get your job offer. Then do whatever negotiating you want to do once they want you and they've given you the job offer. Now, in many private jobs, first jobs, everybody's pretty much treated about the same, so don't expect to do a great deal of negotiating, but by all means try. But just keep it in the right order. Make sure you've got a job offer before you're trying to negotiate about it. People on the other side of that consider this piggish behavior, so don't do that. That's my little pet pig, and she gets offended when people call that behavior piggish. She thinks that's insulting, so don't do that. Here are the original 10. You've got to do your homework. You show up prepared, make sure you know a lot about the program, practice, the department, whatever you're applying for, and don't show up and wing it. Always arrive on time. The global standard for this is 15 minutes before the interview starts. Just be there, ready to go. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. You should be polite to everyone. Sometimes people come in with a bit of attitude and they're not polite to the administrator in the department, or they're not polite to somebody's secretary, etc. Be polite to everyone. You don't know who's going to have influence on the decision, and in many academic departments, the person who sits outside the chair's desk is way more powerful than a junior faculty person in MSK. So make sure you're nice to everybody. Also, it's just the right thing to do. Be a good person and be nice to people. Don't do this. Although my Wharton students have funny stories about that. Make sure you get dressed up. You know, you may feel uncomfortable wearing a tie or wearing an expensive suit, but this is the time to do it. There's an old cliche in US business that you dress for the job you want, not the one you have. And here you should be dressed, you know, like an attending or a little bit better than an attending, err on the side of being a little bit more dressed up. Don't do this. It's a generational issue. People who are going to be interviewing you are going to usually be older than you. Not always, but they will at least be a little bit further along in their career. And in addition to being a generational issue, it just also means that you're not focusing on the interview. And it sends a bad message. So unless it's something critical, just leave it alone for, you know, the 20, 30, 40 minutes that you have for the interview. Don't do this unless, you know, there's something about this tattoo that is critical to your religion or your culture and you want to talk about it. It's probably best to hide those kinds of things and just cover them up. That's not the case either for men or women. You should make eye contact. We're primates. This is an important way of how we build connections with each other. Obviously don't stare at someone like you're a psychopath, but do make eye contact. Do shake their hands, you know, appropriate body language, and don't do that. Now, there are questions that you will probably be asked because every time I've done this live, people raise their hands and say they've been asked a question that is illegal. That's unfortunate. It means that the interviewers aren't being trained well, but be prepared for this. The ones under the first bullet point are the ones that are federally protected. That's the federal agency that handles this. This is true for anyone who's working in the United States. It doesn't matter whether you were born here, whether you're a citizen or not a citizen, or you have dual citizenship. Anybody working here is protected in the US. Now, that said, it's not unusual for people to ask these questions. The main legal way that this can be done is if it really matters for the job. But if it doesn't matter for the job, if you're not being hired because, you know, you practice a certain religion, or you're not being hired because you look a certain way and the CIA is hiring you to be a secret agent in another country where people look like you, other than that, these shouldn't even come up as questions. That said, they probably will. We'll talk about how to deal with that later. As you go down the list, these are things that are usually not allowed based on local regulation, state, the institutional regulation. Most of the places where I've worked outlaw all these questions. I know some of them sound stupid, but just understand that these are questions that people shouldn't ask you. Now, that said, you know, what is your legal protection? Well, if somebody asks you, like asks me what kind of a name is Lexa, I explain it was sort of a Czech name that got mangled at Ellis Island, and then the person hates Czech people and doesn't give me a job, then actually I have legal recourse. That said, there are ways that you can get around legal questions and still get to the answers that some people want. If they don't want to ask you about religion, they may ask you, is there any reason why you can't work a 7-day work week, which is, you know, usually the culture for neuroradiology. And, you know, that's kind of answers the question about whether or not there might be a 1 day a week when you wouldn't be able to work. They can't ask you if you have a disability, but they may be able to kind of ask you this question. You know, you have to wear lead when you're on call. Is there any reason why you wouldn't be able to do this job? And I have a friend who, you know, can't wear lead because of a disability that he has. And if you look at how he walks carefully, you'd see it. And you know, just understand that that's a way that people can get around this. And some of the really crazy ones, and every time I think I've heard the craziest one, somebody comes up with another one that sort of begins, if you were doing our fellowship and, you know, in the middle of your fellowship, your husband was killed in an accident, would you quit the fellowship to take care of your kids or something? You know, I always say that if you could ask questions like that, you should really wonder what kind of an organization would have somebody interviewing who does that. But, you know, it's up to you. But, you know, those are really dancing close to being illegal. And in any case, they're disturbing. There are also topics that generally in US culture are bad topics to bring up with somebody you don't know well. These are all things that we talk about with our close friends and family, at least most of them are. But in general, if you have 30 minutes to sell yourself, you probably don't want to go off into one of these rabbit holes and talk about these things, but it's up to you. But in general, not a great set of things to discuss with strangers. There are also things that just signify that you're stupid if you're asking your interviewer these types of questions. And I've been asked all of these questions. And with some of them, I wonder why somebody cares. With some of them, it's clear they didn't do their homework. I don't know why somebody would think that I'm a weatherman. You can get great weather information on your phone. And some of these signify other things, like maybe they're a slacker. Even if you're allowed to date the medical students, illegal in most of the places where I've worked, it kind of signifies it's maybe not the right person we want to hire for a key position in neuroradiology. So just watch out for those. And this is in an old office in a place where I used to work, but I've got like 20 or 30 of these things up on the wall because my wife didn't want these in our house. And after 30 minutes, the person asked, well, what do you do here? What kind of a radiologist are you? And about half of these say neuro on them. And so if nothing else, we're trying to hire radiologists who are good at observing and using information. And so you just got to wonder what's going on. So do your homework, be observant and try to ask smart questions. Speaking of smart questions, this is one of the slides I'd suggest you focus on, because these are questions that I think signify, one, that you're a smart interviewee, that you really are envisioning working with us. So, as you run through these, what does it take to succeed? What's the vision for the future? What needs to change here? What are you looking for? Is the institution growing? Hopefully it is. And, the last one's a little touchy, but, if you're having a good interview and you think you have a good rapport, in addition to asking, what does it take to succeed? And sometimes you get your answer there because somebody will say, well, we fired somebody because they didn't show up for work on time. Then you can skip 6. But if you have a good rapport, you might be able to ask that question, but that's a little touchier. Do lots of homework. Make sure you know the practice and the people. It's trivial to find out a lot about the people who are likely to interview you. If you're interviewing in a department, you're probably going to you'll definitely meet with your division chief. You'll probably meet with the chair, excuse me, some of the vice chairs and several of the other members of your section. And you can just look them up and you can find out a lot about them. You can go through the 6 degrees of separation and find connections, know where they went to school. You can find out all kinds of things. I did this once at AARP. And someone came up afterwards and told me that I was born in the same hospital as her mother. That was pretty cool. I thought she worked up the street for the NSA. But it's not that hard to do once you sort of see it. She was clever and figured out a way to look up birth records. So just know your interviewers and then get ready with the smart questions, because at some point in almost every interview, the person will turn it over to you and say that I'm finished with my questions. The interview's over. Do you have any questions for me? That's always half right. It is your turn. Make sure you have your smart questions, but the interview isn't over. Just revealing how my own thinking is that sometimes this is where I learn the most about you, because I learn what matters to you. I learn what you're interested in. If somebody genuinely doesn't have any questions and they're talking about coming to make a commitment to work in our department for 5, 10, 15 years, you just got to wonder what's going on. So, smart people don't ask stupid questions, so be ready for that. Before the interview, again, more homework. Try not to waste people's time. I know some mentors and program directors will tell you go out and do some practice interviews. That's up to you. But I think the world is a better place if you're sincerely interested. And so try to focus just on places you really want to go to. Again, look for those connections. You'll probably be able to find a connection with somebody who's in the department or at least was there. Clean up your social media and web presence. Right now in the States, we don't have enough laws about this and about sundowning, stuff that you don't want to see on the web. When I was teaching at Wharton, we made a commitment to not look people up on the web because of this. But understand that the people who are interviewing you haven't made that kind of a commitment, so they may look you up. And if on the first page or two, they find stuff that's kind of embarrassing from some party you were at or spring break in Florida or something, you might want to try to clean up what you can. Same thing with tattoo removal procedures. Again, if a tattoo has, cultural or religious significance for you, then that's different than something that you got during that trip to spring break that is kind of embarrassing. So consider handling those things. Plan the travel logistics in detail. Again, you want to be there 15 minutes before the interview starts. If you take a quick look on a Sunday night and see how long it takes to drive to Philadelphia, and then the next Monday morning, there's a huge amount of traffic and it takes you an extra hour and you're an hour late, that's not going to go well. And again, it's also just courtesy. It's not just that you're going to be dinged on how people evaluate you. It's that somebody planned to take a time off of their procedure day to interview you, and they're going to go home and half an hour late to their loved ones that night. So just be respectful of that. The day of the interview, it's the day to get a good night's sleep. It's a night to do that. It's not the night to go out and party with your friends. You do that afterwards. Make sure you review both the job description and your CV. If you're going on a tour and you're interviewing at 5 or 6 places, maybe more in a week, it's easy to end up in the rock star situation where you forget what city you're in and you say something stupid. And we've had this happen in a couple of the places where I've worked, where somebody is, in the course of the interview, it's clear they're talking about a job that's, 5 miles away from where we're interviewing, and it tells me where else they're interviewing. And also understand that anything you put on your CV is fair game. So while the EEOC, as I said earlier, will shield you if you talk about something like religion or sexual orientation or national background, if you put it on your CV, you've revealed it and you've kind of lost your shield at that point. So while they can't ask you those questions, if they're on your CV, they're fair game. Also, if you put something on your CV that says you won the FACR Lexa fellowship, and somebody asks you, well, what is that? And you can't give them a coherent answer because you made it up or you've forgotten that you did it or you forgot that it was on your CV, kind of makes you look dumb. So don't do that. Again, 15 minutes early, and it means you're in the office ready to go. That means your car's parked, you've gone, if you have to get badged through security, that's done. You're up in the elevators. I worked at the Brigham and Women's Hospital as an intern, and they have the slowest elevators on the planet. You just, get up there. You're well groomed, you have dry hands, everything's done, and it's go time. Just make sure 15 minutes before. On the morning of the interview, just make sure you've done all your grooming. I used to say clean shaven, but there's so many people with great beards in radiology that say just be well groomed. I wasn't implying that you need to shave off your great beard. I was asked to put in overdoing perfume and cologne, just because I always talk to the people on the other side, and that has come up several times that some people overdo it. It seems to be more of a problem with the men than the women in this generation, but just be careful. Some people are very sensitive about scents, and if they have a small office, some people complain about that, so think about it. Make sure you have clean shoes, and dress up. Dark suit that fits you, white shirt, conservative tie for men, leather shoes, and the comparable clothes for women. Now, some people criticize this. They sort of say that this is cultural hegemony and everybody looks the same. And this is my answer, my retort back, which is, yeah, that's true, but this is how successful people look around the world for the most part. I've only worked in 1 or 2 countries that are an exception to this. And this is the most diverse group of students that I ever worked with. This is as much diversity as you can pack into 6 people. They all speak multiple languages. They were born on, I believe, 4 different continents, and they're standing outside our Wharton building there. They're all incredibly successful, incredibly smart people, but what do they have in common? It looks like they all went to the same tailor. They all bought their suits at the same place. So, that's just how successful people look. So at least for that day, it's probably how you should look too. But understand that if I dressed like my relatives did in Czechoslovakia, people would kind of laugh at me and say that maybe I could get a job working in a Czech restaurant or working at Epcot, but it's not how successful people generally look in the world. And during the interview, turn off your phone unless it's a matter of life and death. It's distracting if the phone goes off or if it beeps, to let you know that somebody likes your photo. Try to, if it is a matter of life and death, and this happened to me when my dad was in the ICU, I warned them that if the phone goes off, I'm the only doctor in the extended family, I'm going to get up. But shake hands, make sure your hands are dry. I'll just say it once. I don't care why your hands are wet. I don't care what the fluid is. I don't really need to have you share that with me. And that's, pretty consistent across anybody who's going to interview you. So just make sure your hands are dry. Smile, look your interviewer in the eyes. The only way that isn't helpful is if the person interviewing you is further along the spectrum than you are, then that could, you'll get away with it. But otherwise, do that. Be yourself. If that's really a terrible idea, then try to be somebody better than yourself. But again, you're trying to interview for a job where you're going to stay for years. So if you are faking them out, you're really faking yourself out. So really try to be yourself. Answer the questions you're asked. I mean, one of the things that comes up during the political seasons is that you see people being asked questions when they want to be president or senator or congressperson, and they just answer a different question because they don't like the question they were asked. Maybe politicians can get away with that. I have a 3-strike rule. If I ask you something 3 times and you won't answer the question, I move on, but it's not good for you. People always ask, well, what should I do about illegal questions? And I'm married to a physician, and she'd be the first to tell you that every job she's applied for until she decided to go work for herself, people asked her stupid illegal questions. Questions about being married, questions about how many children she was going to have, how many children she had, those are, and it's wrong to do that. However, rather than overreact and say, I'm going to call the federal government and I'm going to take you down and sue your place, try to be polite if they ask stupid or illegal questions. Some of them grew up in a time where you could get away with that, and some of them are just poorly trained, but it's probably better to be polite, come up with polite answers to stupid questions, or to say, I'm not comfortable really talking about X, but I'm going to be a great mammographer for you because, and then finish that sentence out. Make sure you make your own points during the interview. By the time you're on your second or third interview, you can probably tell if somebody, in general, if people are misreading your CV or if there's something that you need to address. So make sure you get your own points in. If the interviewer goes off track, bring them on track. This is your time. And just a real life example, we had somebody on part of an interviewing team at a place where I worked who would talk to every interviewee about his jazz career and basically burn the whole half hour talking about himself. If that happens, just try to bring people back on track if they go off on tangents. Have intelligent questions to ask the interviewer when you get that opportunity, and they better give it to you. Even if they say, well, I'm sorry, we've run out of time. If you have one burning question, just say, well, wait, can I just ask you one more thing before I move? They can always say no, but you should really try. And again, if you really want the job, you probably have some questions. If they take you out for a meal, order from the middle of the menu. I went out with an academic group and they must have been on a tight budget. Everybody ordered inexpensive stuff, so I'm not going to order the gigantic ribeye steak if everybody else is getting small sandwiches. So you kind of just order from the middle of the menu. It's kind of like being polite on a first date. Be very careful with alcohol, particularly in private practice. People are likely to take you out and show off, buy expensive bottles of wine, take you to a nice restaurant, all good. But if you don't drink, just let people know. It's not a big deal. You don't even have to explain it. It could be for health, it could be for religious reasons, it could be for personal reasons, but be careful. Sometimes people want you to get a little tipsy because, as the cliche goes, it's kind of like, well, let's see what they're really like, whatever that means. I don't think that works very well because most of the time in the reading room, I don't expect people to be falling down drunk. But understand that if they do this, just be careful what you say. Try to stay in control. Try to be one of the less drinking people, one of the sober people at the table, and just be polite if you don't drink. Don't order things where you have to wear protective gear because it makes you look like a little kid at a birthday party, and you want to look like an important attending who's strong hire. Be polite to everyone. Again, you don't know who's going to have impact on your status of succeeding in the interview. So err on the side of just being nice to people. And again, it's just good advice. Be nice to everybody you meet. And the interview isn't over until you're out of the building. So true story, I had in the last couple of places where I've worked, I don't like driving a car to work. I'm a bike commuter. And when I come into the building, I'm not dressed up. I'm not wearing a white coat. I'm not wearing an expensive suit because that wouldn't work well on the streets of Philadelphia or Tucson or the other places where I've worked. You just get your clothes dirty. So I come in looking like the oldest, most pathetic bike messenger in the building. I have permission to bring my bike into the building and take it up through the freight elevator. And as I'm going through the lobby, I hear some people making fun of one of my attendings. And say, that's interesting. And I look at them and they look like they're interviewing age. And I go up and talk to the program director and I say, can I see the Facebook that we use for the interviewing days? And sure, it was they were interviewing that morning. And needless to say, if you're in public saying nasty things about people, number one, I don't like nasty people. Number two, I don't like stupid people. And if they're going to talk like that, maybe they're going to talk about patients and maybe we're going to get sued. Needless to say, those folks didn't do very well in the interview process. So be careful. The interview isn't over until you're out of the building. Make sure you understand the next steps in the process. Prepare to follow up on anything you promised. If you said, oh, I just got an article accepted into Nature or New England Journal of Medicine, and somebody asks you, well, can you send me a preprint of that? That sounds really interesting. Hopefully you were telling the truth. And if you promised to send them something, just get it to them. You should send a thank you message. I think a note is in order. I think this is kind of like a wedding present kind of thing or a birthday thing with your grandma. A card probably is better than a text, but say thank you. Even if you don't want the job, even if you didn't have a good time, these people did take time out of their day to interview you, so be polite. Now, if things don't go your way, be gracious and don't burn bridges by making enemies. If you drunk dial somebody or drunk text somebody at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, you should have taken me, I would have been the best body imager you ever had, people are just going to share that at RSNA for 20 years. And conversely, I can tell you that at a personal level, I once lost a job because I wasn't a neurologist. And they wanted a neurologist instead of a neuroradiologist to do a big educational program. I could have, gotten on a high horse and said, oh, you just don't know how powerful neuroradiology is, and we know more than neurologists do about MR, and we do. But instead, I was polite. I said, thank you, thanks for considering me. And then a year later, I got one of the best jobs I have ever had from the same person. And I certainly wouldn't have gotten that if I was jerky. So, understand you won't always get the exact job you want, but just be patient. Now, what are people looking for in private practice? Well, it's work ethic, it's personality, cognitive skills, team player, what drives you, and then roundedness. Most people want to at least say that they're not just radiologists, but they're a radiologist and they're a motorcycle enthusiast, or they know a lot about great wine, or they run triathlons, or they can speak 3 languages. So that's one of the things that I've seen that they're looking for. In academics, it's not that different, but work ethic, and then we put academic potential up there. Can they teach? Can they do research? Those types of things. But work ethic is still up there. People in academics work hard. Beyond that, make sure you use the interview to win the job. Don't go into an interview passively. Don't just go in there and wing it. Have a strategy. Get into the mind of your interviewer. Do your preparation and make sure you end up interviewing the interviewer, asking them what they want, etc. And it's like what Sun Tzu says, most battles are won before they're fought. And in this case, it's the preparation and attitude that wins the interview. You also see different questioning styles. And I'll just tell you that there's only one of these that's worthy of being done, which is the behavioral one. And when I was working at Wharton, we would interview people for our program, which was an elite program within the school. And we weren't allowed to use hypothetical or situational questioning styles because they don't work well. Is anybody going to really say, I don't handle stress well? You would wonder. But if you ask the behavioral question, I learn what you think is stressful, and then I learn how you've managed it. Because by the time you're interviewing with me, you've seen some stress. I was asked to put this in just because these are becoming popular. I hate these. I don't think they work well, but I understand that they're efficient, and now we have to do them on Zoom platforms and things like that. Just try to make sure you make contact with everyone, whether it's virtual or real. Speak to them. Try to see their body language. Try to listen to their voice. Make your points regardless of the number of interviewers. So make sure you have that agenda, make a lot of allies, and whatever you do, don't make any enemies, because an enemy outweighs out several allies. Make sure you thank them all if you can individually, but certainly say thank you to everyone collectively. I'm going to close just with some smarter questions and answers. I'm the right person because I can improve your practice because I would fit in here because in 5 years, I'm going to do this. I'm particularly interested in working with you because. And these are also great to use if you get asked a stupid question like, well, what kind of a name is that? Or what's your background? Or other things that are either stupid or borderline illegal. In conclusion, it's all about the preparation. Dress for the job you want. Be confident, but don't be arrogant. You don't want to scare people, but just, talk like a confident attending. Behave like everyone you meet is an interviewer. Get into their minds, interview them, and always give smart answers. You're going to get asked stupid questions. You're going to get asked illegal questions. Just steer it back to smart answers and smarter questions. Thank you so much for your time and the best of luck. Thank you.